great time to go to Florida.
When's your wedding?
After one's done their holiday trips.
Aren't you having a
Does it
wedding?
make you feel better?
Yeah,
And
I've been praying.
Not too hot.
I've been real praying.
Have you sent out invites yet? Okay.
They are
Are you
going
just,
to
are you just keeping it low key? Just family?
No, it's, they're gonna invite the people from church and stuff.
The best.
It's gonna be at
Well,
the
that
end.
is family, church family, family, your friends, right?
Things that we can't control.
I mean, when I say family, I mean in the church family and family. You know what I'm talking
Hey, 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 that's homework.
We know God can.
But a place that one of the teachers in Fairview has
That pickle? How about that?
one of the
How about that?
unfortunately,
That's his own doing, though.
I know.
The
Hey.
torture with his arm and his hand, that's me. His feet, that's all him.
Ow.
You can definitely pop it back.
We don't want to break him, because that would get us in so much trouble.
It's called popping
For
back,
our,
not.
let's have her job at home. And it's like a HR job. It's just something, the same thing that Beverly.
He's flexible. He can
Shelby's
endure it.
best friend, Abby does. You know Abby? You know Abby. So, it's funny because your family and your
The
family.
leaf blower we have, Justin,
Uh-huh.
is attached to. I
really love that melody.
Meter combination thing.
I'm improvising. I'm learning how to do what you do.
Isn't that what musicians
That's about being a musician, that's right.
But I
Here's
didn't
the
bring
chord
Feel
changes.
the,
Here's the chord changes, you figure out how you wanna play it.
well,
There's so many songs that have the same chord changes, it's just how you play it.
Yummy.
I am terrible about, like, I still can't read two hands, two lines simultaneously.
Oh, I don't know how you guys do that.
And so I have learned that the bass notes for the guitar are really a lot closer to the treble clef. So if I could just look and play an arpeggio with that E minor,
Why?
Yeah, yeah.
and then my right hand can do
Yeah,
the
but how
same,
come so long?
but I'm still learning how to, like, which one do I
So when you play the arpeggiated chord, are you playing, for the minor chord, are you playing just three
You're
notes?
gonna forget everything you learned.
like what? That's only my arpeggio.
That's a fifth. We call that a power chord in the guitar. Five one. Sounds good though. You don't need that third. And playing the fifths leaves it open to interpretation because then you don't have to
It's
keep
easier
it.
actually to transition to
Yeah, you don't have to keep it in E minor. You can actually, well, depending on how you play the rest of the chords. But
I was gonna see if we could.
Do you need new clothes or more clothing?
So,
This guy's
we're
gonna
about
be
to
so
fight.
confusing because we're moving next door to the big house now. Ooh, you're moving to the big house? Yeah, and we're just making the little house. The
wait.
Who was
Usually when you go to the big house, it's not a good thing, okay?
the big house. So we're moving next door, and we're gonna keep the little place that we're living in as an office.
So who was your sister-in-law? Was
My
there
sister-in-law was in there for
And
15
your
years.
mother, or mother-in-law, and she passed.
No, they live in a different place.
But she's still doing. She's still alive.
She's dead.
She died.
She died.
That's what I thought.
But Dad lives in a different place a few miles down the road. And Sierra, my sister-in-law, they bought a place over in Fort Orchard, so we're gonna be renting those places you have to rent together.
Right.
Give us a really good price for renting.
Well, and not having to do the stairs for you and Adora.
Yeah, I mean there are stairs downstairs because it's a 5-bedroom place.
But you don't have to go up
Really
the outdoor stairs.
No, we don't. And Sky will he takes things up. Yes. But
I didn't do that.
and it's like
It was okay.
and
thought it
this
was a little more left of your head.
Decided, and Adora, she wants to move tonight. Move tonight. So she's not very church. I might ask for a cleaning party at some point.
Wait, let me check my phone real quick.
Somebody important like the president.
Who's doing Sunday school? Kenny?
Sorry, I shouldn't.
I think you're too big to sit on that.
I don't even know if he's important anymore. Any of them.
So then I can drop him on his head and he gets
I
to
was
take a
watching
picture.
the news the other day,
Oh,
and
okay.
I almost started crying,
Kenny, you're too
so
big
I
also.
put on
No
something
laughs.
happy because I'm not wearing the biggest thing in the world.
Says who?
Is Mr. Kenny here?
Yeah, of course. So when we were little, and we had to hide under our desks because of a nuclear bomb.
I remember that.
Go learn some stuff.
That's going to help you now.
Remember,
That
run.
actions.
You know, people looking like Pompeii. Oh, what's that book? Sky and I watched a special the other day on the Muslims and their special rock that they like to congregate around.
The one in the Cabal,
Yeah. And he said
Meteor.
the meteor in Peace with Laughter. He said it looks like there's a toilet bowl wrapped around it.
It's all in one.
And I said, that's not very nice. That's somebody's special rock. And he said, Cindy, I think your crystals are bad. And I said, they were given to me. They are
your crystals.
I have a friend that's really into him, and she just thinks that they're gonna heal me.
Well, we got the right side of the church covered.
What version of what child is this were you playing? What artist?
That was from the hymnal.
Was it the hymnal?
Yeah.
The Mist
No,
Christmas.
I need it for myself.
Emmy, do you know if your mom's coming?
Oh, they should be.
Okay.
I don't know. If they're gonna come on time. Well,
You're playing E minor?
but they should be coming. Unless Paul.
You're playing E minor? E not A?
Is he having to wait for the dishwasher to finish?
I'm an F sharp.
You know what? That could be
I
it.
don't know those. I don't know the
I
names.
was
E
leaving if that
minor
was his
is
excuse.
C.
I'd be like, peace out, dude.
No,
None.
F sharp.
Dishwasher can run
E
on
minor.
its
It
own.
had an E minor.
Not apparently not ours.
I'm never gonna let
E
him.
minor is G.
I'm gonna always give him a hard time for
Should
that.
be
Paul won't get one
two
until it
sharps.
breaks down.
So you don't get the best in the business.
One sharp.
And he won't even get a new refrigerator until it breaks down. And me and Mom have
C.
been praying
D?
for that thing to
Wait.
break
I can
down.
tell you how to fix that.
I'm a master of sabotage.
Exactly.
Can you come to my house and
Yeah, G.
sabotage the
I'm
refrigerator,
sorry, G. Play G. E
please?
minor.
Mix it up.
Okay. I don't know that I can transpose this.
Sabotage.
Accidentally, like, rip the.
Great Rage Against the Machine song.
What's that?
Sabotage.
The seals, if you accidentally mess up the seals.
I forgot about that
Yeah,
song.
it's like an extra.
Because it came out before you were born.
No, I listened to it.
Yeah.
No, because the building
It's
was
plastic,
because I'm
which
not
is
good at
weird.
pretending it
That is
was.
crazy.
I totally own it. Just ask Joe, they'll tell you.
Yes, but we have home insurance, so hopefully.
We have,
It covers a portion of it.
Yeah.
we
Oh,
actually
Corey got a new truck?
with dishwasher and fridge because it broke earlier, and so we just bought it for $650.
And we're surprised why?
She just didn't want to move it.
Did I sound surprised?
He like changes trucks like I
I'll
change
pay
my underwear.
$650.
They're like guitars for him.
Yes. I can relate.
Oh, look, there
Only
he
I
is.
don't trade
Yep.
them in, I just get a new one.
Yeah.
Get another one.
Did dishwasher finish, Paul?
She was
There we
saying
go.
she was saying she wanted a new dishwasher.
He
Jeez.
started it. He started the.
dishwasher works fine.
He started the entire conversation.
If it worked fine, you wouldn't leave it, you would leave it home alone to do its business.
Yeah, isn't that the whole purpose of having a automated system?
Life is so nice that we don't have to like wash all water.
Tell your machines break while you're out, and flood the house, something like that.
That's when you need a new machine.
I just fix
Because
mine,
you don't want to
switch
ruin
them.
the floors because water damage is more
The
expensive
rollers on
than
the
a new
top, I had
dishwasher.
to change all the parts in my basket.
Oh, for the rollout
Four
tray?
bags.
Did they rust?
No, the rollers just came off.
Oh.
That seems like it.
The new stuff's metal.
If you went with Bosch, you wouldn't have that problem.
It is a Bosch dishwasher.
Is it?
Not been for
The Germans.
It's not made under the Bosch name, but it is a Bosch.
Mhm.
The tech told me that when we bought it.
And in reality, I broke it. I didn't mean to, but it happened.
I didn't throw you in the bus.
I was hoping for a new dishwasher.
What?
Really? Because I don't care about the dishwasher.
You're so cheap, you would not do that.
Didn't you just get a new one like a short few years ago?
Yeah, but I don't like it.
5 or 6, whenever we remodeled the kitchen.
It doesn't do what I like it to do.
All right. Make sure the online stream is working.
Are you gonna get booted this week?
I'm not showing
Okay.
anything. Maybe when I start mentioning the word Muhammad or Islam.
Get censored for sure.
Why did you guys get marked on YouTube?
Yeah, I showed something that had copyright, I think.
A video.
All right, good morning. Wendy's, good to see you. You want to open us up in prayer this morning?
Heavenly Father, thank you so much that we gathered here today. We just want to praise you through all these times, good and bad, Lord, because you're here with us, God. And that is just the most amazing thing. There is no greater gift than when we come to prayer and you are here. And we just want to lift you up for that. Be with Justin today as he teaches. Be with the YouTube people. Maybe they will learn something, even if there's censorshiping thing, that they will find Christ in these lessons, Lord. In your name, amen.
Amen. All right, so quick review from last weekend. Who can tell me what the original meaning of Arab is? What is the meaning of Arab? The wanderer. It means to be, it's a disparate people joined together or mixed together. Why? Why does that encompass the Arabs? Because they're mixed.
They're different tribes.
Right. So Arabia is a conglomerate of different tribes.
The Bedouin of Arabia are a mixture of different tribes, correct? Is what you're saying?
So is the South.
Yemen,
So the
vacation in Yemen, I think.
how about the origins of Arabs? Where did the Arabs originate from? What's their lineage?
Their lineage was from Canaan, and then from Canaan there was two sons of that one person.
Shem?
Shem.
Yep. So Shem is where we get the word Semite, right? So any Arabic speaking or Hebrew speaking people that draw their lineage to Sam in Arabic, Sam, but Shem are considered Semites. So when someone asks you if you're anti-Semite, you tell them to be more specific. Do you mean the Jews? Yeah. Okay. What else? Where else do they draw lineage from? So Shem's Eber. There you go. So Eber descended from Ishmael. Who's Ishmael? Son of Abraham through Sarah? Hagar, right. Okay.
The fake son.
The fake son? No.
He's not fake.
Well,
Abraham, he wasn't the son that God promised Abraham.
yes, that's what I was.
He's still a son.
Still blessed by God. All right, so then we went through the southern tribes. The major tribe that was in the region of Yemen, with the capital is Majin. They were what was the name of the tribe we covered? Or the people? Nation? I guess you call it nation.
We covered Sheba, but that's more east, right?
Yeah, Sheba. So the Sabaeans.
So the Sabaeans were the whole of the south? I need to see that.
They weren't the whole. So there were tribes. Let me see if I can pull up a map here. All right, here we go. So,
That's right.
yeah. So the Sabaeans populated the majority of the South Point here.
I was thinking Oman area.
Yeah. So there were other smaller tribes that populated this region, and as well as up the Fertile Crescent. But the Sabaeans were the primary tribe. And in fact, as we go through the Bedouins, they used I'll save that. So, yeah, so the southern tribes were the Sabaeans, and then we're going to get into
the western part of the south wasn't very populated, except for along the seashore. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So this, you mean right here, this area?
I said west. I meant east. I'm sorry.
Oh, this part.
Southeast.
No. No.
Where Oman.
I mean, it was populated, but it was by smaller tribes. Some of those tribes are, I have them here. So the western was the Hawazin. The Kinda were further inland. They were more nomadic in nature, similar to the Bedouins. And then, yeah, the Sabaeans were the more economical. So they did trade with Ethiopia.
They had settlements on the other side.
Right, eventually. They also conducted trade with Assyria, Babylon, Rome, as we'll go through when we talk about the Bedouins, because the Bedouins were key in that trade.
Found where the Sheba and Dedan, where that's found.
Okay, yeah, so Sheba was basically the father of the Sabaeans. All right. What kind of people were the Sabaeans? Were they nomadic? No, so they were more defined by their territory. They were more, I guess, civilized or cultured. They had a central worship temple, which was in Merib, and they were also very advanced in their irrigation process. So they built the dam. It's actually one of the biggest engineering feats in history. It was a dam that was used to irrigate a region probably the same size of New York, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. Okay. There's the dam. So the Merib Dam. Damn.
That's where that came from?
And then that's the remnants of the temple. So were they monotheist or polytheist at this time?
I believe those were polytheists.
Correct. They had a hierarchy of gods similar to the Greeks and the Romans. Okay. So now we're going to look at the central tribes. So the initial settlers between 8,000 and 4,000 BC lived in that region of Arabia was actually it was pretty fertile. Archaeologists and geologists have found remnants of, a pretty fertile land. There was hunting. They found, weapons, arrowheads, bows in that region that's now, covered in sand dunes. And then sometime around 4000 BC, in a matter of a few hundred years, the climate rapidly changed and became, go ahead.
Is that anthropogenic?
Yeah. Cow farts.
I couldn't believe it. Well, there was like 10 billion buffalo literally in North America that could have probably caused that.
Moving on. So rapid climate change, and then it became the arid climate that it is today. So now they lived in a very parched desert area that receives no more than 250 millimeters of rain a year, which is just under 10 inches of rain. So they, unlike the South, which the Arabs call a Shab people, which means people defined by their place, they were a Hadar people. They weren't defined by where they lived, obviously, because they were nomadic, but they were more defined by their kinship, by their tribes. The tribes in central, the Bedouins were essentially families or clans, families that made up clans, and they had an allegiance to a chieftain, similar to the North American Indians, really, in their way of life. Reminded me of I don't know if anybody's read Frank Herbert's Dune series, but it reminded me of the people of Dune, actually. And I wonder if he actually did some research in the Arabs, because he uses a lot of Arabic terminology in his book. The Mahdi, yeah.
So the main character was, the Mahdi, yeah. I didn't read books. Movies put me asleep.
Really? Oh, the movie's awesome. But I guess since I read the book,
The
it's...
movie's like, are you going to say something now? Stand there and look.
But there's a lot of... They're doing a really good job of capturing the it's hard in a book, because the books have a lot of thoughts that they go through. So it's hard for a movie to portray those thoughts. Anyway.
I'm really bad this morning, I'm sorry.
So they had an allegiance to a chieftain, and as well as a chief deity. So they would It reminded me of when I was in the military, my time in Chile. A lot of the people, once you get away from the coast, are nomadic as well. They're pastoralists, and they move animal herds around the Andes. And we took a horseback riding trip and went through, actually literally went through, a bunch of drunk sailors ran their horses through their settlement and tore down their shrines with their horses.
No.
Yeah, we're lucky we didn't get.
Oh, you were one of the idiot sailors?
No, I was
Oh, thank goodness.
I was sober,
But were you
amazingly.
That's bad juju.
Yeah, but yeah, so they would
What's
set up.
wrong with you?
They would set up a shrine, and their gods were more focused around nature because they relied on nature. Yep. They didn't really have any individuality. The clan was their identity. So the clans were made up of several hundred tents, and they would migrate with the seasons. And each clan was an independent unit. And so they were a people whose sense of location and loyalty was movable.
That's the same mindset that Asia has. I mean, it's no different. It's the community.
Mm-hmm.
It's the community
Very
that-
strong community sense.
Well, what you respond to is the expectations of the community, not, what you want, like Western
Right.
independence. Interesting. Oh, yeah.
But the southern, the Sabaeans were different. So they were more individualist in nature. And as we get into the kind of the unification of the Arabs, we'll see kind of a colliding of different social ideology between the Bedouins and the southern tribes. So each clan initially spoke a group, a form of, it's called High Arabic, but each clan had a different dialect. So none of the clans really spoke the same, same language. Yes, sir.
What time frame are we covering here?
So this is between 800 BC up to the turn of the, up to the birth of Christ. So right now I'm talking, the time period I'm talking about is coming up to 800 BC.
So is High Arabic the Arabic spoken by in Iran and Iraq?
Yes, and I'll get into that when I go through the language, because that's
That's really
the key. That's really what, that's the pride of the Arabs, really. Remember, we talked about the Logos, and that's what really unified the Arabs. So the Bedouins acted as guides and guards of the desert. So they were masters of animal husbandry, which means they raised animals for food, for trade, for clothing, and they and given their familiarity with that, Central Arabia, they acted as guides for trade routes for people that came from the north to the south. And then they would exchange animal products for grain, dates, weapons, and clothing of the south. So if you remember, the south was, their main economy was centered around dates, grain, as well as clothing, because they had amazing dyes from the shellfish and clothing. So very beautiful clothing. So eventually the Bedouins would become the arbiters of trade between the north and the south. They also became experts in breeding camels. That's really also a pride of the Bedouins. So they would, if a Bedouin died, his camel would be slaughtered and buried next to him. And it was by camels that the Bedouins' method of economy began. So they became mercantile mediators between the Indian Ocean, the Arabia Sea, and the Red Sea up to the Mediterranean. And so they became the middlemen between the northern tribes and also the northern nations, as we'll get into, and the south, the Sabaeans, primarily. Go, yes, sir.
Weren't they renowned horsemen too?
We'll get there. Yep. So, in Genesis chapter 16, Genesis chapter 16, verse 7 through 12. It says, "The angel of the Lord found her by a spring in the desert." This is Hagar. "A spring on the road to Shur, and said, 'Hagar, Sarah's slave girl, where have you come from, and where are you going?' She answered, 'I'm running away from my mistress Sarah.' The angel of Adonai said to her, 'Go back to your mistress and submit to her authority.' The angel of Adonai said to her, 'I will greatly increase your descendants, and there will be so many that it will be impossible to count them.' The angel of Adonai said to her, 'Look, you are pregnant, and you will give birth to a son. You are to call him Ishmael.'" Ishmael, God pays attention, "because Adonai has paid attention to your misery." This is the key verse here. "He will be a wild donkey of a man, and his hand against, with his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, living his life at odds with all kinsmen." So in true to Ishmael's nature, as it describes here, through the use of, initially starting with camels, the Bedouins became camel-born warriors, which also gave birth to another large portion of the Bedouins' economy, and that's raiding. So the raiding was a way of nomad life, even as early as Genesis, as it describes Ishmael's character. And many ancient inscriptions have been found depicting the glorious raids performed by the Bedouins and their prayers offered up for booty. Not the booty I'd be praying for, but...
Oh my God. You are lying. Okay, just reminded you.
No one's listening. There's one person online.
You should not be saying things I'm thinking.
You should not be saying
Isn't it better to take out your eyes?
So raiding was conducted, their raiding was actually very structured. It was not done haphazardly. In time it became a formal economic institution with fixed etiquette and shares.
Oh, we're here to raid you. Oh, what? Here you go. Here's your booty.
Yeah, so they would, after a raid, they would divvy up portions of the booty depending on, the family status in the tribe, and it was, I guess, what would you call almost a socialistic economy in nature. So, those old folks that couldn't support themselves were always supported and held up by the tribe through booty. So raiding for the Bedouins was not just endemic, which means, you know, practiced by one particular tribe, but it was systemic as well. So it was a social practice throughout all the Bedouins. So essentially the Bedouins held a herding, raiding economy. So their economy was based on animal husbandry and raiding.
That's what I was thinking too.
What's that?
The Vikings. The Vikings were exactly the same.
I don't, although I don't, they were very, there was very little bloodshed shared in their raiding. They were actually very civil about it.
Which ones?
What's that?
Vikings?
No, I'm not talking about the Vikings.
So the Arabs were like, excuse me, I'm gonna take your booty.
Yeah.
How come I'm thinking Monty Python? Hurling insults.
So because of the nature of the Bedouins' economy, any advance towards long-term stability between the tribes was impossible. It was not a very stable method of economy raiding. So then along came the horses. So the raiding nature of the Bedouins only increased as horses migrated south from Egypt. So that's debatable where the horses came from, but the majority of historians think that the horses migrated from Egypt. And so this raiding economy that I'm talking about started way early. I mean, we're talking 3000 BC, and the horses that they domesticated happened around that time period. So the horses integrated very well within the Bedouin communities because they were already masters of, they're already pastoralites, which means really animal husbandry. They were masters in raising and herding animals. So the Bedouins were the first amongst those the tribes of Arabia to tame and specialize in horses. So much like the camels, the horse became a significant part of the Bedouin. So they too would, if a Bedouin died, the horse would be sacrificed and buried next to his master. So then, as the horses became a widespread technology among the Bedouins, they eventually found themselves to be highly effective mercenaries. So they were used and contended with the South Sabaeans. So the Sabaeans, they would conduct raids against the Sabaeans at times, and the Sabaeans would also utilize the Bedouins to gain mastery over the eastern tribes, southeastern tribes. So the Bedouins would pack and ride their camels long distances. So they'd use the camels as the pack horse essentially, and they would carry they would tow their horses with them, and then as they came upon their enemies, they would trade off and leave the camels behind and mount their horses. So the stamina was always fresh against their enemies.
Alexander learned from them.
So the Bedouins with their camels, I don't know if you remember, but we talked about the Syrian king Shalmaneser, and he was one of the first people to mention the Arabs in writing. So with the camels and horses, the Arabs would be led by the first mentioned Arab in history, Gendibu. So he was the first known labeled Arab to fight against the Assyrian expansion. So the northern tribes, which we'll get into, I don't know if we'll get into today, they utilized the Bedouins, led under Gendibu, to fight against the Assyrians.
Year?
Huh?
Year?
This is around 840 BC. So over the course of Assyria's rise, King Tiglath-Pileser III claimed victory over Shamsi, queen of the Arabs, where they claimed, the Assyrians claimed over 30,000 camels, just to get an idea of how integrated camels were in the Bedouin community. Now, the queen of the Arabs, Shamsi, she was a queen of the northern tribes, but again, they utilized the Bedouins as mercenaries against Assyria. And then King Ashurbanipal captured so many herds from Arab land that he quotes, "Within my land one bought a camel at the market gate for a few pence." So meaning they flooded the market so much that you could buy one with whatever pence is, a penny, or some low dollar amount.
What king was that?
That was King Ashurbanipal,
He was king of
Assyria. So over the 8th century BC, the Assyrians came hard against the Bedouins, and that was largely because the Bedouins supported Babylon in their fight against the Assyrians. Later in history, the Persians would also utilize the Bedouins to insulate their territory from the Egyptians in the 5th century BC. All in all, the Arab Bedouins to their northern neighbors, Assyria, Babylon, and Persia, were a marginal people, but often extremely useful, and they weren't being annoying. So they were, as Assyria sought to, trade with the South, because the South was, had highly valuable products or highly desirable products, pearls, dyes, things coming up from Ethiopia in that region. Oftentimes they would, as they traveled through the central part of Arabia, they would be raided. So they were a nuisance. And oftentimes the northern tribes would act as a, what's a good word? The northern tribes would hire some of the Bedouins tribes to act as a guard, essentially, to travel with, like, the Assyrians or whatever northern nation wanted to go south, and then that Bedouin tribe would actually fight against their, fellow countrymen to prevent raiding. So there was quite a bit of turbulence within the Bedouin communities.
Are we still seeing pretty bloodless confrontations?
Yes. Yeah. Not against Assyria.
No, yeah. I mean, Bedouin to Bedouin.
Yeah. Yep.
Or Arab to Arab, I would be.
Yeah. See, where am I? So there's Gendibu. Okay, so that's the Bedouins in a nutshell. And again, out of the Bedouins came the High Arabic, or what they also call it the prophetic, the prophetic language. So Bedouins practice what they call magic, but it was essentially they had seers or oracles. They're mystics. So those oracles spoke in what is now High Arabic, or a prophetic language. And that language is what became adopted. So we'll get into that when I go through language. Got 5 minutes? All right. So the northern tribes, which you can kind of see in the background here, encompass this region here over time. So the northern tribes were also Shab people, so they were people identified by their territory, they weren't like the Bedouins, where they were identified by their kinship or their clans.
Question.
Go ahead.
Is Judges 6 part of this then, or is this something different?
What is Judges 6 saying?
It says the Midianites were, where is it? There was raids against the crops, when the seeds were planted, marauders from Midian, Amalek, and the other neighboring nations came through and destroyed the crops and plundered the countryside as far away as Gaza, leaving nothing to eat and taking away all the sheep, oxen, and donkeys. These were the enemy hordes arriving in droves of camels, took numerous counts, and slayed until the land was completely stripped and devastated.
Well, that's the Midianites, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they weren't Arab at this time. But a similar description can probably be made of the Bedouins. All right, so the economics of the North consisted of extensive trade networks. So they were really like the South, they were masters of trade. They were basically the marketing organization for the South. So they provided much of the meetings and trade agreements between northern nations and the South. So the main tribe that made up the North is the Kedarites, and they ruled basically between the 9th to the 7th century BC. I won't go there, but in Genesis 25:13 it talks about, I think he's the second born of Ishmael, who is Kedar. So Kedar is the father of the Kedarites. So that's where they descend from. The Kedarites were essentially settled Bedouins who became heavily influenced by northern nations, which primarily were the Canaanites and the Arameans, and then eventually as well as Assyria and Babylon. So they were a civilized and cultured Bedouin, really. So they were also masters of the camel and the horse.
Urbanized, I'd say.
Yeah. And interesting enough, even the southern tribe, I think I mentioned this to you last week, and through the southern tribe, they found the ancient inscriptions by the Sabaeans, where their characters were, their alphabet essentially was identical to the Canaanites. And then rose the Nabateans around the 4th century BC. So the Nabateans were descendants of the firstborn son of Ishmael, who was Nabat. So that's the Nabateans. And they existed really in parallel and lived amongst the Kedarites, but over time they saw the influence of the other nations, the surrounding nations, on the Kedarites, and they became Puritan in nature. So in an attempt to separate or purge themselves from the influence of the northern nations, the Kedarites dissolved and eventually became that region became ruled by the Nabateans, whose capital is present-day Petra, which is in Jordan. So they made their way quite a ways north. Yes, initially. So ironically, the Nabateans were annexed into the Roman Empire around 100 AD and would eventually convert to Christianity. So by 400 AD, the Nabateans stopped writing in Aramaic and instead wrote in Greek. So, huh? Well, so most of the northern tribes, including the Nabateans and the Kedarites, share a similar fate as the northern tribes of Israel. So they were completely absorbed into the northern nations.
Was that conversion elective or forced by Rome?
So the other book I'm reading, it suggests that it was elective because they saw people, these well-organized people, with a well-organized religion, and they were impressed by it. And so I think once I finish this, I have to pick that book up. But the way he describes, what's that?
Christian is such a broad catch-all phrase. What
Right.
flavor of Christianity does it allude
Well,
to?
this is Rome, so it would have been Constantine.
And this
Yeah,
was
can't do Catholicism.
Yep.
Although Catholicism today is not ancient Catholicism.
Yeah, because Constantine came around 300 AD, I think.
325.
Yeah, so this was around 400 AD.
CS 325. You are so filling a hole in my knowledge that I did not even realize I had. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So really, there's to do a quick review, the South, let's see, I got this, let me look here. So there's before this time period when the Central and South Arabia became absolved, or essentially just became a one people, the South rebranded themselves as the original Arabs. So I don't know if you remember last weekend we talked about the terms I wish I could remember Arabic, but I can't, so I got to look it up. Al-Arab, Al-Arabah, and Arab Muta Arabah. So one is the true Arab and one is a Arabized person, or essentially a similar to a Gentile being grafted into Israel. So as we go through the history of Islam, there's this battle, Shia, Sunnis, the southern tribes and the central tribes on who are the true Arabs. And so the South rebranded themselves as the original Arabs, and it was a brand that would remain in the back of their minds through all the future generations. So as we get into, present day animosities among the Islam, which is strange because already among the people of Arabia, there's a claim to who the true Arab is when the term itself, or the definition of people, was defined by outside nations.
E-R-E-B.
Yeah. Which goes along. There's a personality about the Arabs that kind of repeats itself in this book. That throughout history they're constantly controlled by other nations. There are people who are seeking independence, but they're they can't get past the controlling nature of other nations.
Unless some charismatic leader could arise
And that,
and
yep,
unite them religiously and economically.
yep,
They might actually form one of the greatest and longest empire in history.
yeah. So after we talk about language, then we'll get into the coming of Muhammad.
So when you're talking about how they were controlled by other nations, so are you talking about more of the northern kingdoms that
Yes.
existed along so Babylon and Syria, those.
Yeah. So one thing I didn't mention is all the above nations set up an annexed king within the northern tribes, similar to what we saw with Israel. They would take a northern tribe Arab and set him up as a vassal king, but he was ultimately a puppet of the whatever nation it was, Assyria or Babylon or Persia. Yep.
But that would mostly affect any of the tribes that were in the north, probably not as effective against the southern.
No, the south through this route here, because basically this whole crescent here was the cultured part of Arabia, and they were pretty closely tied. The southern tribes were tied pretty closely with the north.
The central as well. Like you said,
Yeah.
their economy all worked together.
Right. But it was easier for, a nation like Assyria to travel along this region. But when they tried to go up against the Bedouins, I mean, that's a very extreme environment. And that's a people, again, it reminded me of the Doom series. They were people of the sand, and they were very hard to root out.
They ride big worms.
No.
The people that lived in the central part of Arabia, the fact that, just the fact that the environment would mean that anyone that lived there would have to travel around because there's no place probably that can sustain anyone for long periods of time. You'd have to travel from place to place in order to.
Yeah. Now, as we get into kind of the unification of the Arabs, Assyria particularly actually made quite a bit south and began pushing the Bedouins into the south, and that's when kind of the integration started to happen, where the Bedouins started inserting themselves into the southern tribes, and we'll get into that as well. All right, I'm past my time.